All right, today we are going to talk about unit rates and what a unit rate will tell us. So first thing we're going to look at is the actual term for unit rate. And a unit rate stands for a rate in which the second number, usually as a denominator, is 1 or 1 of a quantity. For example, 1.9 children per family, 32 miles per gallon. And unit rates are often found by scaling back other rates. A unit rate, we usually write it as a fraction, and you'll often hear or see the word per, okay, or hear it. So miles per gallon, that's a unit rate that stands for 32 miles in 1 gallon. So for 2 gallons, we'd have 64 miles. All right, so let's take a look at some of the book statements. Okay, ratio statements can also be written as per statements. For example, it cost $120 per student, per 10 students to go on the trip. An equivalent comparison statement is the cost per student to go on the field trip is $12. Now we can say 12 for every one, 12 for each, or 12 per. Now let's take a look at the original unit rate, which is right here, $120 per 10 students. So we had $120 for every 10 students. Now in order to scale that back, we're going to turn this ratio into a fraction for $120 to 10 students. Okay? So now we have the ratio written as a fraction. It's still a ratio, 120 over 10. And now what we're going to do is we're going to scale it back. We're going to turn the denominator into a 1 to get the unit rate. Okay, so we need to think for 1 student. So how do I turn, and this works exactly like equivalent fractions, how do I turn 10 students into 1 student? Well, when we work with fractions, we work with multiplication and division in order to turn them into equivalent fractions. We either multiply by something or we divide by something, and we do that to both the numerator and the denominator. So what we're going to do here, since I want to turn a 10 into 1, I need to divide the 10 by 10, and that would equal the 1. And then I'm going to do the same thing to my numerator in my ratio, and that would give me $12. So this is where they get the $12 for 1 student. And then we can write this as the $12 per student. Okay, and we don't even have to put the 1 because in math, anytime there's 1 of something, and it's a unit, we can actually just write that single unit out. We don't have to put per 1 student. It's going to be per student, and based on the conventions of our language, we know that that means that there is 1. Now, we want to make sure we don't put an S or anything like that. So $12 per student, that would look like 12 to 1, okay? Which, again, we can work with the ratio just like it is. If we go to 120 to 10, we can work with it. We want to turn that second number. So we want to turn the second number into a 1. How do I get from the 10 to the 1? And we do that with dividing it by 10. So we're going to do the same thing here. Divide by 10. Okay? And then that gives us our 12. And thus $12 for every 1 student. Okay, so let's take a look at the next thing down. Okay, it says the cost of food is $250 for 50 students. What is the cost per student? All right, so we have an original ratio of 250 for 50 students. So I'm going to abbreviate students with S and use the $sign for the money. And I want to turn that into 1 student, or per student, into the unit rate. All right, so how do I get from 50 to 1? Well, we would have to divide by 50 in order to turn it into 1. So that means in order to make an equivalent ratio, I'm also going to divide this side by 50. So 250 divided by 50 is going to be $5. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do this longhand for those of you going, wow, how did he do that? Well, it's not math magic, it is simply math. Okay, so we've got 50 divided by, or 250 divided by 50. Okay, I know it can't go in there. I'm going to get rid of these zeros real quick. I'm going to divide both of my numbers by 10, and then I have 25 divided by 5, and I know that's going to be 5, right? Okay, so if I multiply both numbers up by 10, 50 and 250, my answer is going to be 5. 5 times 50 is going to be 250, and we subtract and get our 0, and I got my 5. So the cost for each student, or per student here, is going to be $5 per student, or a 5-to-1 ratio. All right, so let's take a little bit further look down on the page. Today we are going to be talking about, or in class tomorrow, we're going to be using chewy fruit worms. Now, chewy fruit worms is a very long name for simply a gummy worm. So let's take a look at this next question. Okay, so we've got this chewy fruit worm, also known as a gummy worm, that is cut, that has 4 different colored segments, or 4 different fruity sized pieces, and each segment is equal in length. So we're going to share this 4-segment worm amongst 4 people. So the easiest way to do this would be to simply give each person their own segment. Okay, so person 1 would get this, person 2, 3, and 4. So if I have 4 people to 4 segments, that is a 4-to-4 ratio, which would reduce down to a 1-to-1. Everybody gets 1 segment. Okay? Now, the next thing it asks is, how can you share this 4-segment worm amongst 3 people? So I've got another worm down here, and this time we are going to divide it equally among 3 people. So the first thing I'm going to do is I would cut this segment on each one of the segments, okay? And then person 1 would get this, person 2 would get this one, person 3 would get this one, and then I've got this leftover segment. So since I still have 3 people, I would divide this segment into thirds, and I would let person 1 have this third, person 2 have this third, and person 3 have this third, so that each person gets 1 and 1/3 segments. Okay? So this one, we would have 4 segments for 3 people. Okay? Now, I want this to be a unit rate. I want my, how many does one person, each person get? So how many for 1? So I'm going to take, and I'm going to turn my number of people into 1 person. Okay, well, how did I do that mathematically? Well, in order to turn a 3 into 1 mathematically, we're going to divide it by 3. So we're going to divide this side by 3. Okay, that would turn it into a 1. Then what we're going to do is, because we're working with fractions or ratios, and ratios and fractions are very closely related, pretty much the same thing, we are going to also divide the 4 segments amongst 3 people. And now I have 4/3 of a segment per person. Well, 4/3, these two things are equivalent. So I can use a picture to help divide it up, or I can simply 4 segments for 3 people, divide that out, and I would get 4/3 of a segment per person, or 1 and 1/3 segments per person. Okay, I know this one was a little bit on the long side, but unit rates are kind of a tricky concept to get. Go ahead and watch it a few more times if you need to. Be sure to come to class tomorrow with question A2 on there. I'll go ahead and show you A2. Okay, what this is, it's doing more things. So like real quickly, show 2 ways that 4 people can share a 6-segment worm. Let's go ahead and draw out a worm. Okay, and we got 6 segments. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we want 4 people to share that. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then since we have 2 left over, I want person 1 to get 1/2, so we can divide this one into halves, and we can divide this one in half, and then person 1 gets that half, and I know this isn't drawn real pretty. Person 2 would get that half, person 3 would get that half, and person 4 would get this half. So each person then would get 1 and 1/2 of a segment. Okay? So let's look at that as a ratio. We've got 6 segments to 4 people. Okay? And I want to know my per person, which means I'm going to turn my person number into a 1. So if I divide that by 4, I get 1 person. And then if I divide this side by 4, I would get 6/4. Okay, it sets itself up right here, 6/4. And then I change this fraction into 1 and 2/4, which would equal 1 and 1/2 segments per person. Okay, so that is a real quick explanation. If you only need to go back and watch part of the video, that's fine. But you do need to come to class tomorrow with A2 done. All right. Have a wonderful evening.